Hello, and welcome back to the Games Institute podcast. I'm your host, Marisa Benjamin.
And I'm Tobin Rossico.
My co-host. Give yourself credit where credit's due.
All right, I co-host this thing.
And today we are joined by Dr. Lennart Nacke. Say hello.
Hello. Good evening. Nice to meet you.
Say, I suppose, what your affiliation is with the GI.
Yes, for sure. So my name is Lennart Nacke. I'm an associate professor at the Stratford School of Interaction Design and Business, as well as the Department of Communication Arts. I also direct the HCI Games Group at the Games Institute, which is where I used to spend my waking hours. But now I just sit in this tiny little office with fake lighting. It's the Botox of the digital world. Of fake light.
I know everyone looks so great with the illumination coming just from the computer, but yeah, thank you, Lennart, because I needed to start right off the top and say to our listeners that this is very rare, but we have a professor on our podcast. So we're going to have to change up the format accordingly since there's just so much ground to cover. And of course, the reason why we had to have you on the podcast is because you are just probably one of the most well-known people across the world you're one of the reasons why the Games Institute has such an international profile.
Yeah.
So it's time that we finally put you on this platform so that you can help us reach even more people internationally. You'll share it on Twitter and suddenly we'll get like 500 more listeners. That's the plan. And if not, we want our money back.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive in with our icebreaker.
So what is your earliest childhood memory of playing games? And that can be games of any medium or genre.
Oof, yeah. So games, if you consider games more broadly, I think it's obviously Ludo and the German variant called Mensch ärgere dich nicht, which means human don't be angry. Basically, if you translate it like that. But it's, I think that would be one of my first childhood games, just playing that. Actually, with my grandma and my dad. My mom was never one for playing board games that much, but my grandmother and my dad were very much into that. And so I think that was sort of one of the earliest ones I played, just board games. And then, obviously, dabble around with chess and stuff like that when you're growing up. And then, of course, the highlight for me was when my dad got a C64, is it C64?
Commodore 64?
Yeah, the Commodore computer, with the green screen and thick keyboard. Brought that home one day, and he had Boulder Dash installed on it, and my digital game was Boulder Dash. That was like an entire night gone right there.
What's the rules of the first game that you mentioned that I won't dare to try to pronounce?
Ludo, yeah. So it kind of works the way that there's different. Parcheesi is a different name for it, and so different variants of that. But it's basically there's 4 corners of the board, and you have 4 pins in your corner, so it can be played with up to 4 people. And then it's like a cross with the little dots, and you throw a dice. If you roll a 6, you get to move out of your initial location, and then you have to walk around the cross on the board until you bring your pins or your meeples into that goal area. But you have to have the exact roll of dice to place them in there. And the thing is, you can kick the other people out as you're going on there. So if you land on the field, you kick them out and they go back to start and they have to start again.
So it's like Trouble.
Yeah, or Sorry is the of it. Sorry is the.
I think I played a Swiss version of it called Dog, or at least they called it Dog. But we used cards, not dice, in that version too. So that's funny. And was that Ludo, or was that like the German game that you?
Yeah, Mensch ärgere dich nicht is just the German name for Ludo.
Oh, okay, fascinating. Okay, cool.
Principle.
I think in Canada we call it Sorry, but in the US they called it Trouble. So every nation just takes on their own identity with the naming of it, but it's the same game.
Fair enough.
Did you continue to grow up with board games, or when did you switch into video games? And I already I don't know much about computers. You mentioned the one with the green screen.
Yeah.
Was that around the same time? Like, how did you make the transition from board games to video games?
I mean, that was certainly a defining moment because my dad bringing home a computer, changed everything. All of a sudden, we had this cool machine that could literally do everything. You could, type something into the terminal, and then it would do what you had type run something, and it would run the program. And so that was such magic to me when he brought that home. And obviously, the first thing you got to find out is how to find files, and then how to run those files, and then maybe some configuration files for the game that you want to run. It was all about starting the game, really. Back then it wasn't really about programming or other things, but yeah, that definitely got me excited. And then I kind of later on I bought a Nintendo, and the Super Nintendo, to be precise. I played a lot with my friends on their NES. They had a Nintendo Entertainment System. So we played some of those early games, and then I bought a Super Nintendo. Actually, stop back there. Before that, I had a Game Boy. Never mind, Game Boy was the first one.
With Tetris?
Super Mario Land and Tetris. Those were the games that I played up and down for sure. That was definitely a big thing. And then the Super Nintendo was after that. I think I was already hooked on Nintendo through the Game Boy, and then the Super Nintendo was just a natural follow-up. Yeah.
Was the Super Mario Land, was that the one where you would like fly and go in a submarine?
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
Super Mario World was when you actually had the cape and you could really like.
Yeah, that was on Super Nintendo.
And then the Super Mario Land, the fire was the big thing, like getting the fire flower, and then submarine and other things you had as well in that. I'm pretty sure it was just a sort of green. The black and white sort of version on the
I grew up with those games. My older siblings had that. That's why I said Tetris, because I feel like everybody who had like the big brick Game Boys, because I think it must have like came with Tetris, because it was just so easy to pack in. But yeah, that's really funny.
Yeah.
Was this when you were like young, when you were a teenager?
Yeah, it was, when I was in primary school, I think it was. It was like everyone had them back then, right? Like it was literally the age of Nintendo. Go to class and all of my friends had a Game Boy. Like it was just it was when the Game Boy came out, and we were just basically entered school, and it was exactly our demographic. Everyone needed a Game Boy. Like I terrorized my parents to get me a Game Boy to have that thing. It was.
I mean, I grew up. I forget which technology it was that was the hot thing when I was a kid, but that's kind of exactly, how I was. I was never into anything like that at all. So my parents bought my sister a Game Boy Advance, and I had one, but I just didn't really care for it. So I had no clue about any of this. I was just only into board games.
Okay. Yep.
This is why I wonder, like I'm very naive when it comes to the ordering of when certain technologies came out and what it meant for people.
Yeah, and I get it mixed up too, because I'm so used to my defining moments on the Super Nintendo, because that was really when gaming just became colorful and wonderful, and that was high-end graphics back then, right? Like all of these colors that all of a sudden, like back then it was about colors, not about realism. Today it's all about smooth animations and physics and all that stuff. But back then it was just like, oh my God, look at those colors. You can play games in color. This is crazy. And so you made that natural progression to those games, and then it becomes a social fabric of your day-to-day in school as well, right? Like at the start, it was in the pauses and the breaks, you would obviously exchange Tetris scores and kind of talk about like how to get a Tetris in the first place, and just kind of talking about the game. But then also you would hang out with your friends. I remember I had a friend that obviously had the Nintendo Entertainment System, and then we used to play, and we'd go outside, and then we play a little bit more, and we'd go outside again. It was all a mix and blend of things. And then later on, when I was like 16, Doom came out, and Doom was a great unifier because you could play it networked, right? And all of a sudden, we're like playing together. Now this was nuts because that was not a thing. The internet was not a thing back then, and you had sort of this local place where it was actually right by the school, and it was called the tea house or tea sort of hangout place. And so you'd get there, you could have a tea, they'd have a local area network. So it was basically an internet cafe before they had internet cafes. And it was just for students. So it was just teenagers there hanging out, playing Doom together, and fosters a sense of community. It's really kind of cool.
Yeah, it's so great to hear you talk about all this stuff, because your energy completely changes. I can see you being transported back to those memories, and it's like a sense of wonder, and it really helps me understand where your research is now. And I can sort of trace it back to all of these like really formational moments for you, starting to notice that technology can bring people together, starting to feel the awe in what the possibilities are, and the games themselves. Was there anything in particular about the types of games that you were playing? Like, when did you start to fall in love with game mechanics?
That wasn't until much later, I would say, because at the start it was really just about what technology can do, and just like how games were really a showcase for what computers could do back in the day. It was like a game came out and all of a sudden you're like, well, the computer can't do it anymore. We need to buy or build better computers because the game doesn't run. So what do we do? And I think, the first time I really kind of so for me, there were a lot of things that were different motivators in those games, and one of the biggest moments was for me when I had a French exchange student, Julian, I think was his name. So we had lots of exchanges in Europe. That's like a normal thing when you go to high school. You have these exchange students from England or France or whatever, and it's supposed to help you learn the language, and they stay with your family for 2 weeks, and you make a new friend and learn a language. But the thing is, sometimes they come and they don't speak the language at all. Yeah? So here's this person that can speak a little bit of English, mainly French, not German at all. And so you got to communicate with them somehow. And we had The Secret of Monkey Island installed on the computer. And so we played Monkey Island together, basically. The mornings and evenings, we with hands and feet and through the game, we communicated. And I think it was more English, to be honest, than French back in the day. But yeah, he'd say, I think it was actually German. Yeah, they had it translated into German. So I think he had to learn all those German words, because you have that interface in LucasArts games. You have that interface with the actual words on the bottom. So you had to learn the words like go to, use, interact, like all of this stuff, because you click on that. There's a point and click adventure, right? So you had to click on these action verbs. And so he had to learn them in German. I had to learn them in French because I had to communicate to him what to do. And so we had this wonderful opportunity, obviously never designed by the game's designer, that we ended up learning a language together just by playing games together. And again, all of these moments that you have in your childhood when you're playing games, but you're actually seeing how it's like it's a glue. It is a social glue that helps bring people together. So when people are complaining these days about kids playing too much Fortnite, I'm just like, I'm transported back to my mom's. I'm pretty sure they're having a good time, and this is not as bad as a lot of people think. Obviously, there's always overuse and other things to consider, but at the heart of it, I think I would love to put myself in those shoes again. Mind you, back then it was more innocent. We didn't have free to play or click to win, and all of a sudden our parents would be charged tens of thousands because we wanted a new costume or something like that. So games have become a little bit more evil over the years as well, you have to say. But that sense of wonder is still present, and to me that's still a defining moment of many games that are out there still. And a lot of the game designers that you meet at GDC, the Game Developers Conference, they're all about that. I think they still have that in their heart. They remember those moments. They know why they're in games as well. So yeah, that was basically the first time that I noticed, okay, game mechanics, what do I have to do? And very much story as well. Monkey Island is very much about story. And so for me, that was a big moment where I'm just like, because my parents were all about television. That was the medium of their generation. They still love their television to this day. But for me, it was really like, okay, no, games are so much cooler because they're basically like a book, but I can experience it. So it's just like, this is so cool. Somebody, turned this book into an interactive experience for me. So yeah, that's kind of how that came together. And then after that, it just got more exciting, and Half-Life came about, and then I started going to university at some point, and grew up with video games alongside of it, so that was kind of cool. I went from like enjoying to play Half-Life to learning how to mod and edit levels as part of my PhD to actually sending an email to Gabe Newell and asking for support for this stuff. And then actually, a year later, I meet like one of the psychologists at Valve, and then even a little later, I moved to Canada, and some point later, I'm actually in the headquarters and visiting. And it's like you get transported from a player and somebody that experiences it somewhere far, far away to actually being on the pulse of things and getting to experience it live. And that is such a cool, transformation to, go from just seeing it from the outside to actually being involved in it. Just knowing all those people has been exciting. Yeah.
So we don't want to glance over your academic journey too much by just saying you started going to university at some point. When did that start, and what was your beginning interest games, or was it psychology, or where did you start, and then how did you kind of end up as games as the focus of your research and PhD and stuff?
Yeah, no, it was a bit weird because it oscillated a bit, right? Like I was very excited about computers, obviously, from my childhood through those moments with games, but I never really thought I was going to study games. It was never really a career path for me at all. I was very interested in creating movies and like digital stuff. I mean, I'm still very excited about photography and these kind of things. Yeah, that was the original idea. And I worked in a sleep lab, so I had access to EEG equipment and things like that. And I thought that was kind of exciting too, what they could do with those computers. Because I mean, I was sort of just so support staff, so I was just backing up things and moving things around and stuff like that. So, but I got to work with computers, and I got some exposure to physiological sickness and things like that. But I would never think that that would play a bigger role later in life for me. It was just kind of a thing to see what's possible with medical devices and computers. And then for university, it was pretty clear. I had a lot of discussions. I kind of wanted to apply to a film studies program, but they were so competitive to get in. Plus, my grades were relatively good. So, in discussion with my parents, they're kind of pushing more for a sort of a computer science angle, because they kind of said, you like computers, and this is going to be the future. You need to, make that your thing. But and then I was like, but I hate math. So how do I do this? And so in the end, you take the necessary evil. Obviously, you're gonna have to understand math to get into computer science. But I took a program called computational visualistics, which is computer science, but with a nice. It was one of the first interdisciplinary programs out there in Germany, and it would allow you to take courses in the humanities. So you go take film classes, you had to do political science and some of those courses. We had an applied subject in medicine, so we would spend some time at the medical faculty. And the main area was computer science, but with a focus on graphics. So it was all about rendering and computer graphics. And as you might know, that nobody tells you that, but that's actually like harder than the regular computer science. So you all of a sudden, you're doing matrix operations, and like we had two more years of math, or one more year of math than the computer scientists, just because there's way more math involved in computer graphics. So I think I was kind of oblivious to that fact when I started that program. I just saw the end result, and the end result is very motivating, right? It's always nice when you do something with a computer and you see the outcome and you see, oh yeah, this is kind of cool. And Pixar was a big thing for me. I always kind of wanted to go into sort of a Pixar kind of job, and I saw the cool stuff they were doing. And but then of course they're all math people, right? Like, so they all knew a lot about rendering and computer graphics and all that stuff. And somewhere along the way, I ended up being in a research group with one of the first video game professors in Germany, and that was so much fun. It was kind of towards the end when I was in Germany. It was like a combined degree, bachelor and master's, because back then they were just switching it to the international system. So you do bachelor's, but you're basically signing up for the master's. So you finish your bachelor's along the way to your master's, but you're signed up for 5 years of university basically. So it was more like in the master's years that I was getting into the computer science, into the computer games area, and but still very much rooted in computer science. And so I was looking at like making learning more accessible in games with like a different kind of language. With Smalltalk's like a different programming language. Squeak was the environment back then. So yeah, just like very rudimentary, but like yeah, that kind of got me into games to start with. And then when I was done with my master's, I wanted to go into the games industry, and it turns out that you're almost already slightly overqualified with the master's, or back then anyways. Nowadays that has changed. Back then that was kind of like, unless you were modding levels in high school, what do you do? What are you doing here? You're kind of, you could, could go, but you could, get much more pay doing something else. So does it really make sense? And then obviously I had already at that point a very academic interest, and was kind of thinking, I really want to study the humans side of that. And that's, when I picked my PhD in a different country, and different supervisor, different field, and wanted to go more into game design, and just kind of changed that around a little bit.
What was that the PhD that you ended up doing? What country did you go to?
I ended up going to Sweden, and that was a European Union funded project. So these are really nice because they're big clusters and a lot of funding. Very different from the North American model where you pay a lot of tuition, and it's just different. You're an employee. You don't pay any tuition, and you get paid to do your PhD, and you publish the outcomes. And in Sweden, the university actually has to commit to payment until you finish. So even if the project runs out, then the university would just have to use their own budget to pay you until you're done. So
wow,
it could not have been a better deal, right? You started, and then you know that you have a job until you get your degree. And so it was, kind of a good setup, I have to say. That was pretty good, and lots of freedom. It was very lonely too. It was kind of a sort of a remote campus, kind of a little bit like my situation in Stratford right now. But this is much nicer setup, University of Waterloo. But there it was sort of a small university, and then the remote campus of a small university. So it was basically like a building in the middle of nowhere, and it was sometimes I felt pretty lonely, and it was a pretty weird space to be in if you don't really speak Swedish and you're in the middle of Sweden, which all of them speak excellent English, but it's not as easy to break into the community if you don't speak the language. So I actually started learning the language as part of when I was there, and I still remember bits and pieces of it.
What was the research project that you were doing as a PhD student or candidate, whatever the term is?
Yeah, so you're a student until you're basically ready to defend, then you become a candidate. But in that, the main project was about the fun of games, or the fun of gaming. That was the name of the project, and that was what excited me. Somebody saying, you get to study what makes games fun for your PhD. I'm like,
oh, that is amazing.
Coolest topic ever. And and so that was sort of the main guideline. Then we came about it from different angles in the end. I ended up doing a lot of user experience, player experience research, looking at new methodologies, physiological measures. And this was a new thing. Obviously I had no experience with that going into it. But my supervisor was very adamant about us using these measures, and we had some really nice partners. One of them, Niklas Ravaya, is one of the big people in the field in Europe, anyways, in Helsinki in Finland, that is doing the research on those physiological measures. And I think I applied for like a travel grant or something, so I got to go to Finland and Helsinki and spend some time at that lab, and got really nice training from the students there. Shout out to Matthias and Simu. I learned a lot from them when we were in that lab. I picked up a lot of knowledge about those physiological measures. And then obviously you read the papers and everything. And and then started doing a lot of effective computing, even though I didn't know that that's what I was doing back then. But basically, this effective gaming research. And then my thesis was aptly titled Effective Ludology, as I was using those effective measures in the ludological space. I was trying to bring together sort of those two worlds, the game studies world and the scientific world. Not very successful necessarily during the PhD, and back then I didn't even know what HCI was. It's kind of like just finding my footing, and then once I met several people from the Kai community and the HCI community, all of a sudden I'm just like, okay, these are my people. This is kind of where I belong, and so that was exciting. I was very happy when I met that community, and got more connections there, and that was just kind of, it's kind of when you've been doing something but you didn't quite know where it belongs, and then all of a sudden you find out where this belongs. It's like the missing puzzle piece, right? Like you do your PhD in that field, and you get and we had like media scholars and communication scientists and all sorts of input. It was fantastic in terms of a working environment, because if you do a EU project, you also travel around Europe because you have to go to every partner. So we went to the Netherlands and to Finland and to Germany and Sweden, of course, and so in Denmark. And so you just kind of travel around, and you meet up, and you have to report on your findings and your progress. And it was very inspiring. And, some of these were top people in the field that I didn't know back then that they were the top people. But, obviously over time you end up saying, hey, this was, if I would have known that this was such a great opportunity at the time, I would have, obviously, I'd do it over again. But it was just that's really, I think, what opened this field up for me. It wasn't necessarily my local situation, because that wasn't the best, I have to say. So that was very frustrating at times. But that EU project was really what gave me sort of the inspiration to take this further, and then enabled everything that came after that. The entire career was thanks to those project partners. Yeah,
that's great. I can really start to see how all of this fits together with where you are now. So now you are the director of the HCI Games Group at the Games Institute and at Stratford. Because that's where you're located. You're located in both places, although right now we're all located online. There we go.
This is Stratford behind me, but I'm. As you know, I've kind of when I started, it was a bit of a weird scenario here in Waterloo. Obviously, I first had to come to Canada, so I did a postdoc, and then I did an assistant professor somewhere else, and so I've experienced different lab cultures. And so coming to University of Waterloo, being at two departments, or now a school. Stratford wasn't even a school back then, and we got that title in between. We were kind of just a unit kind of thing. So everything just kind of became official in the last 5-6 years here. So this was another exciting thing. Both of my departments kind of had formalizing years years that formed them in terms of new names and new focus points that they've set. And so that's how that came about. And what I needed was a lab space back then, when I was kind of like, I didn't have a grad program. We still don't have grad programs. We're working on it hard, and hopefully this is going to materialize. So you had to get cross appointments and get a place for grad students. And my departments or my schools couldn't provide that for me back then. This is obviously changing now, but because there was no space, the Games Institute was the most welcoming place to go, because I think I chatted with Neil even when I interviewed. And Neil and I, we also co-organized this gamification conference in 2013. So this was when I first met Neil, and I was still at a different institution back then. And I remember when he just contacted me and says, so it turns out you're like you've done a lot of work in gamification, and I have to chair this conference, but I don't know very much about this area. So it'd be awesome if we could get your expertise in that. And that, I was young, I was a young professor, and here are these experienced people from Waterloo reaching out, and so I was excited, and I was like, yeah, let me run your conference, basically, because I was very excited about it. And basically they had all the funds and everything in place, so it was a wonderful collaboration. Just kind of really opened my eyes up to Waterloo, and then through a matter of coincidence, I end up working there 2 or 3 years later. So definitely an interesting development. I didn't see that coming. But that's kind of when I already understood Waterloo is really pushing for games and doing a lot in that game space. And then during my interview when I just met everyone at the Games Institute, it was kind of clear that Games Institute would be the supporting place for me when I get started. And they've been nothing but supporting throughout the years, right? Like as you know, it was just it felt like home right away. I didn't have to do much. I just had to show up and say, you're doing exactly what I want to do. So let's do this here. So that was good.
Well, you've I mean, more than reciprocated that support, because you've brought in so many professors into our network. You've brought in so many students. You've brought in so many international people, industry partners. Like I think that the Games Institute is what it is because of our members like you who give back more than what you can get. Although I don't know if you can quantify it as simply as I've put it, but certainly like our ecosystem is what it is because of our members.
Yeah, and I think it makes it easy if you're kind of on a common denominator, right? Like if you feel like the Games Institute kind of they point in the direction and then they get out of the way. I think a lot of departments have the problem of getting out of the way because they point in the direction, but then they kind of hop onto a carriage and you're supposed to pull that carriage. Games Institute, it'll be over there and we'll be following along as we're all tracking in that direction. So you kind of feel like you're on this trek through the Sahara and they have the water and everything to make sure you don't die of thirst, and you have all that support, but they're not kind of pushy, or you don't feel like there's some sort of drag. So that was very nice, I have to say.
Yeah. From my perspective, I've been a staff member for about 3 years with the GI, and what happens is somebody comes to us, the staff or whoever, somebody sitting at the pod next to them with this idea that seems really far-fetched. They say, for example, okay, I'm gonna form a new lab and I'm gonna call it the HCI Games Group. Although you were there before my time, but just as an example. And then we go, okay, that sounds kind of cool. What would you need for that? Oh, we would have to essentially invent that infrastructure in order to provide that. So then it gets started. We give a little, and then the thing keeps going, trekking along. And then after about 6 months, it's as if you can't imagine life before the HCI Games Group was ever there. You can't imagine life before some of the newer endeavors, the feminist think tank. I can't imagine the Games Institute without that. The Games Institute podcast, right? Like, this was one of those concepts that we brought up. But now that we have it, it's like, okay, yeah, we do need to spotlight the stories of our members. I can't imagine that ever not being there. And that's sort of how we build and how we grow. So, related, what was the idea for the HCI Games Group? What was that all about? How did that come to be?
Yeah, so that's actually, I have to admit, that's an import because I had actually formed the HCI Games Group at my old institution, and I did bring some of my PhD students over with me. Obviously, it's always a weird spot that you're in if you're applying for a new job while you're still a professor, because it's not necessarily the regular thing. Usually people get hired as assistant professor and then they walk up the tenure track and become full professors. I don't think it's very often that somebody, it does happen often enough, but that somebody switches careers in between and goes from a full professor or a tenured professor at one institution to a tenured professor at a different institution, and even less likely as I did pre-tenure. So pre-tenure, you don't really switch. It's not a very smart career move, I have to say. In hindsight, it's better to wait until you have tenure, because then it's easier to switch. But pre-tenure is a very risky change. But there were a lot of factors that facilitated that for me. So really, yeah, the HCI Games Group was already there before. I had already formed that, and I really wanted to bring my group to Waterloo and make it, give it that space to grow. And boy, did it grow fast. Like, it was a very small, sizable group. And then, over time, specifically with the international interest, I mean, that ended up just being a thing that just also was so well supported by the Games Institute, by the University of Waterloo, with several programs. We ended up, I think, pretty much every year, we ended up having at least 3 or 4. Sometimes we had 7, I think, on our highest summer, students that came over from all around the world and worked with us as interns over the summer. And it has, obviously, that's, a very I think that's a very good moment for a group too, because you mix it up, you mix up the members as well. Sometimes it can be very stressful if it's a lot of them, because your group grows so much in size and then it shrinks down again, and can I have to keep managing that? But it was very nice to have these new perspectives. Like, I really enjoy these interdisciplinary perspectives. I think it helps us to, there's so many different influences that can help you get stuck in your research, whether it's, a gender imbalance, whether it's an imbalance of political viewpoints, whether it's an imbalance of disciplinary hardening that you have in certain areas. I think switching things up and opening up the space for all of these different viewpoints on a regular basis is very important for growth. And I think that's one of the most inspirational things about our group, is that we have been able to facilitate this growth. And even during the pandemic, it's been quite an interesting year, because we did keep getting those international students, and they actually ended up sticking with us. Usually they just come for the summer, but because it's all remote, what does it matter if you have another person in your Zoom meeting?
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's great.
Yeah.
That's, a surprising benefit.
Yeah, it is, definitely. And so that's been an interesting development for sure. And it's even more interesting now, because now we're also seeing people that graduate throughout the pandemic, and then we're able to bring them on. And it's like Katja, for example, one of our earlier visiting interns, that then became sort of very entrenched in the Games Institute, of course, as well, and now is coming back for a postdoc, and finally, we have her on Canadian soil again, and you're part of all of these journeys as well, and it just makes me very excited to see that kind of growth. And it feels good to be able to run a group like that, where we facilitate that growth and that change, and also obviously see those career opportunities open up as well. So
How many? I just want to really quickly, how many members do you think you started with? Because you said it was a small group. And how many members do you think there are now? Is that the same question you had, Tobin?
No.
Well, really, I started with, at the very start, it was just, I think, one or two undergrads. And then I took a PhD student and a master student. So both a PhD and a master student. And but before I came to Waterloo, there's also a lot more shift. So I had like a master student that was from a different country, but then went back to that other country. And so, it wasn't the most consistent of things. When we arrived in Waterloo, it became much more consistent. I think that's also obviously tied to the institution itself, because Waterloo is a very attractive institution, and, facilitated some of that, and I think opened up some of that career space. And add on top of that the growth of every one of the places that I was attached to. Games Institute was growing, the department was growing of communication arts, and the Stratford School was actually turning into the Stratford School from being just Stratford campus. So, all of these opportunities just made things more exciting and opened up so much space for people to just enjoy their time working in Waterloo, and then also to kind of think, okay, there is actually a space here, and there is a space for my ideas and my research that fits within the Games Institute and with these other departments and schools.
So what I was going to say was, as we interview students, there's kind of two trends. For the humanities, you have stories of, I was just kind of going along, and then I met Neil, and then everything changed. Then you have like the HCI computer science students who are like, I was just doing my thing, and then bumped into Lennart at a conference, and then everything changed. So I think it's funny that you are kind of like the bridge, because you met Neil, and then you brought like the two worlds together. So I think that's really cool. But what does your research look like now? And whether it's COVID or pre-COVID, you could talk about that. And what kind of projects go on in the current HCI Games Group?
Yeah, it's very diverse. That's always the thing. Specifically, I think the main challenge right now is for everyone that's doing user experience research or anything with people-centered design, people-centered development is so hard, because you can't really study people in person. So it all has to be done calls or interviews, or remote metrics and observations and things like that. So that's very challenging right now. It's a very uncomfortable spot, I think, that we're in, and everyone's hoping to at least return to the Games Institute to do some research. Maybe this summer. Hi, Agatha, where are you? But I think that's definitely something to to overcome there in terms of our research directions. In terms of like where we are thematically, one of the big themes that we always had was exergaming and doing games for health, whether it's well-being, mental well-being, mental health, personal just feeling of well-being, relaxation, these kind of things. But then of course also physical activity and physical health. And we actually just had a nice large kickoff with the Exergetic project. This is together with partners in Switzerland, and it's a sort of a pen like between Europe and Canada, sort of an international project. And the idea there is, of course, that we want to be able to make this technology that this company Spheri in Switzerland has developed is called an exercube. So it's like a sort of a cave-like system where you have projected walls, and it projects the game onto those walls, and you have some opportunities for interaction there as well. And then we want to enable this kind of immersive exergaming experience also for older adults and for people that are struggling with physical activity. And I've had students in the past, like Dennis Kappen was one of my PhD students that was kind of, when I made the transition to Waterloo, he still stayed at the old institution and still worked with me at Waterloo, but like he had to just kind of wrap up his PhD there, but he was still kind of working with us in the group. And he's a professor at Hamburg College, and very interested in that gamification for older adult space, and that's what he wrote his thesis on. So that was, a big thing for us to kind of look further into. And so this is kind of interesting to see that kind of, keeping that area up in our research with this new project as well. And health games is just sort of bubbled to the foreground for us. We want to build games that actually help people make a change, help people improve their well-being and their health. And one of my PhD students, Ali, she's working on a game together with a prof from optometry as well, that kind of helps with diagnosis of some eye disorder that we ideally want to be able to diagnose that in early childhood, so that we can provide proper treatment or at least have a path to that. And it's of course more exciting for little children to engage with a game than to engage with a rather boring task or something like that. So we want to make that accessible via mobile phones or via tablet computers, and hopefully have a way of treatment and diagnosis that enables to really tackle some of these issues that we see in that space. I'm also very interested still, and this is always so hard for me, like my area where I did my PhD in, the effective gaming stuff, specifically physiological measures. So if you're a student watching this right now or listening to us and you're physiological measures in video games, why don't you just send me an email and we'll talk? Because I'm always on the lookout for somebody that's passionate about this, and it's so hard to find good students or students that are like motivated to stay in that area. And I have a very nice collaboration with my former postdoctoral supervisor in Saskatchewan and another student from Denmark who's very interested in that space. And he'll be looking into the psychology of fear and hopefully some of the responses that we can measure physiologically that are related to sort of these fear experiences that we have in video games. So quite an exciting topic. Very happy that that's moving forward. We also have, we had a huge foray in gamification over the last years, and I had an absolutely fantastic student who's currently also a partner in my company, Gustavo. I think he was also on this podcast.
Yeah, he's one of an OG guest.
Yeah, and he's been so good in terms of personalization of gamification, and obviously we still do in that space through our company. And it's just a very exciting space. Again, it's always hard to find somebody very passionate about that, but in Gustavo's case, that was a very lucky coincidence, because he was very passionate about gamification. So it came just at the right moment to be doing that research. But like I said, right now it seems like there's a little bit more of that health angle with the current students. I'm always a little flexible. Like I want to do my own stuff, but gently push the students in those directions. But then sometimes there's also a little bit of backpedaling. I have two students that are very interested in narrative, Derek and Karina, and that was not really on my radar until they really brought that to the forefront. We really want to do more with that, and so we eventually ended up making space for that, and it ended up exciting me as well, and seeing that as a potential area that research could be conducted in. And so, I think it's a it's a symbiosis that we have between the professor and students. Like I have areas that I really want, that I'm really passionate about, like the gamification, the physiological research, games user research kind of stuff. But then games user research is so broad. So, Karina wanted to do games user research and then added that interactive narrative angle. And that was fine for me because I didn't really have that in mind, but it kind of fit under the umbrella of the games user research stuff that we were doing. And the same with Derek, right? And so this is kind of interesting. And then, of course, you have people that are, aligned with some of that board game angle that I have as well, where I teach a course as well about board game design and just kind of, basic introduction to game design. And so, I have some students like Joseph too, who is also kind of, coming from that course actually into a master's and now, doing something in that space as well. But also, yeah, with a wide area of interest as well, looking at, social isolation, loneliness, and curiosity. And yeah, so it's nice to, have all of these students going into different directions. A couple of new students that also just started last year that are, yeah, just kind of still exploring. We did a lot of stuff, as you might know, with some of the students that have been on the podcast for financial institutions as well. So we worked with several banks and, looked into gamification for banks. And so that was kind of interesting as well, because banks are very traditional and, not very open to these kind of fun things. And then just kind of looking at, how can we improve some of these more traditional things that are in place. And I think that's interesting for me as well, because I do, or I have kind of switched a bit more to user experience research, just partially due to Stratford having such a strong focus on user experience research and design. And we really want to push that in the next couple of years more. And so I do find, in the gamification space, that's really where I feel most at home when we can do that user experience research and design really more, focused on the design front of things instead of just on the technical or VR front. Like Katja did a lot of audio and VR stuff as well. That was sometimes also quite technical. So, I could probably, talk for hours about all the different projects. I keep remembering more and more and more of the things that we do. But yeah, it's pretty broad. This is why it's called the HCI Games Group. It's pretty much everything under the sun that falls into the area of HCI and games, and we'll find a place for it.
Okay, I think we should pause for a second, because that was great, but my mind is spinning. I feel like there's always, around the hour point, a moment where like my brain is spinning. I'm sure a lot of other people. So to just brain dump for a second, what I find really fascinating about everything that you're talking about, it's all about this, this curiosity of what happens when you bring people together with technology, this, basic HCI. But then what's surprising me is it seems like the games is sort of a mechanism for that interaction. And I never really thought about it that way. I always assumed, just from working with you, that the games was at the gamification component was always the core of what you do, but it sort of seems like it's much more about the social interaction and the application for people. And part of the reason I had that misconception, I think, if I'm correct in thinking it's a misconception, is because whenever we get somebody from the media knocking on our door to talk about gamification, you're the guy that comes and takes the call and helps people understand how gamification actually works. One of the first times I met you was actually at a talk that you gave at Communitech about the difference between gamification and gamefulness, so that industry partners could bring it into their work and improve their product. But now that I'm sort of hearing you talk about your whole biographical journey and where you are at now, and you're also talking about where you hope to be in the future, it seems like the true curiosity for you is about how we can leverage technology for a whole variety of social applications for people, medical applications for people, improving people's lives through technology. So yeah, then it's just, I don't know, I'm really enjoying thinking about it differently, how games become the tool, there's a word I'm thinking of, how games become the way that you actually make that happen.
The catalyst? No, that's not right.
More like it's like a car.
Vehicle.
The vehicle?
Vehicle. Yes, the vehicle. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, it's people first, right? Like my interest is primarily in people, and that's, I think, also my journey. It's I shifted from, I guess you could say I started with people, and then I went into computers and the technical aspects. But then for the PhD, I kind of turned around and focused more on people again. So it was really people, but I also, I really want to understand people through technology and then facilitate people's lives through technology. So technology, not as an evil counterpoint, but as glue, as facilitator, as a lubricant to those kind of experiences, that it actually, removes the friction of our day-to-day lives that we are facing and makes us, elevates our everyday experiences. It's really about elevating our experiences through technology. That, where my main focus lies.
Yeah. And now that I think about it, even in the ways that you described your early experiences with games, you weren't describing your experiences with the games. You were describing your experiences around the games. Because, you've also just described all of this other research that you're doing with games, but you didn't include in there details about what those games actually are. So it's just really cool to think about how you experience games almost as a technology, almost as like I don't know enough about technology to use the right terms, but I see it as like as the buttons, right? Like the gameful thinking are things that you apply to technology to make it serve its purpose better.
Yeah, it's much more about the results of pressing the button than about designing the perfect button. Although there is something you said about designing the perfect button. If you talk to Donald Norman, he'd probably talk for hours about designing the perfect door, because there's so much wrong with doors. But it's definitely. I think designing the artifact is informed by a curiosity for the people. So I do enjoy the process of designing the artifact, but I do enjoy much more the actual experience and the rise it gives to the experiences of people. I think it's also kind of where I'm at in my career stage. When you're younger, when you're a PhD student, you're more involved in the design process. The older you get, the more removed you get to be from the design process, and you are really more on the experience process. So you kind of starting to see more the big picture. You look at it as the system, and you think about it more in terms of systems design and how to improve the design of the interactions within that system, and not so much the design of the actual artifact, because often we get to do that as profs. It's very rare that we have time to actually sit down and design an artifact.
This is something that I wondered about too. So thank you for noting that. What you feel your role is as a professor who's guiding all of these students doing very much their own projects, right? How do you conceive of like what's bringing them all together and what's advancing the overarching agenda of the HCI Games Group so that you can continue to support more students and grow? So we are coming up to near the end, and before we close, I really, really wanted to ask you about what you see is the value of doing collaborations. And I was going to ask you about doing separately, what's the value of doing collaborations with industry, and then what's the value of doing collaborations with your researchers internationally. But for the sake of time, I wonder if you could just take one of those and roll with it.
Well, to me, I don't like when research exists in a vacuum, or research just exists to give rise to other research. I feel like then you're not producing a lot of value for society. So I think our job as professors is to provide value in two main ways. One is to provide and give an understanding to businesses and areas, and I will have a lot of colleagues that will disagree with me on that, but I do think it is research is most relevant when it actually has an impact to an application, when we can take some of that in a business context, and we can actually think about here's value that can be generated, here's value that can be brought out, we can optimize our processes, we can be more effective, we can create better products, something along those lines, because that's just the reality of it. That's a position that most people are in. Most people are in a business. They are day in, day out, they have to create something of value so that they can charge people for it, because that's how economies work. And then on the other hand, our big job is to be mentors and fosterers of intellectual growth, so that we can facilitate for the students that want to learn more, that want to have a better understanding of a complex phenomenon, that we're there, and we're sort of there as cheerleaders to make them aware of that phenomenon in the first place, and then B, to give them the best possible support so that they can feel they can freely explore that phenomenon on their own. But it's really, I think, as a professor, that's sort of the job, is to provide that support. And so that kind of brings me back into this whole economics system of value. If I can communicate my value to industry, the industry is more likely to finance my research, which will then enable me to provide the best possible fostering and growth and support for my students. So it is kind of a system, right? Like it is, if I can communicate the value of my research to industry, industry will then say thank you by financing that research, which will then lead to me being able to mentor my students better. So that's sort of the system that I feel myself being a part of. And I know that that is definitely not something that most of my colleagues will probably agree with, but that's how I see it.
Well, that satisfied my curiosity. I was actually quite surprised that just to the way that you approached responding to that. Not surprised knowing, but yeah, it's good to hear it framed that way. Usually people give the response of like, well, industry partnerships expand the knowledge, and they let you tap into more people. But the way that you see it as bringing research out of the vacuum and making it more real for people, which in turns allows more research to happen, like that's something that I want to bring into the way that we talk about partnerships in general all over the GI. But yes, Tobin, feel free to take it away in the closing. I will sit back and listen to you talk about games.
All right, so what we like to capstone every episode with is the question: if you could get everyone in the world to play one game, what game would you choose?
Ooh, that is tough. Do they have to play the game together, or do they just have to play my game that I like?
It could be multiplayer, or is that what you mean? Or
yeah, because like I obviously my favorite game that I would love everyone to play is Zelda Breath of the Wild, and along those lines also kind of like one of the earlier Super Metroids, but nowadays probably more Zelda Breath of the Wild. So you can see I'm a Nintendo kid. Mm-hmm. But then there's also sort of this experience of, if I could have a session with everyone in the world, would I play a game? I would play Overcooked with them, because that would be nuts if everyone just says, "Oh no, you gotta chop, 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 deliver, serve," and everyone's just screaming back. And it would be hilarious. I would have the time of my life. So yeah, I think that's that. I guess it's two different answers. It's like everyone. If I could recommend a game to play for everyone, it would be Zelda Breath of the Wild. If I would have the opportunity to bring everyone in with me, it would be something like Overcooked. Yeah.
That is so funny.
Why Breath of the Wild? And why not Ocarina of Time? I guess that's the real question.
Ooh, probably because I unfortunately had to do my degrees during Ocarina of Time, so I didn't get to spend as much time with it as I got to spend with Breath of the Wild. And yeah, I know that Zelda purists will definitely criticize that, but yeah, Breath of the Wild just because of the way it has made me also experience this new form of gaming that's now ever more prevalent with Stadia and cloud-based gaming services, that it's device independent, right? And Switch was the first time I felt device independent. I felt I could be on the go. I played it in Germany, I played it on the plane, and then I stuck it into my living room, and I'm sitting on the couch, and I have the same PlayStation experience that I have, with the PlayStation. But in this case, it was obviously the Switch. But that kind of couch gaming experience that you would have with a real console. So that I think is that was one of the first games where I experienced that device independence with a also fantastic game. Like, obviously, no question about Breath of the Wild having all of the game mechanics done extremely well, just so much. I have to go back playing that. Just talking about it just makes me want to play it again. So
Wonderful.
Yeah, this has been a really, really interesting hour. And like I promised at the top, it's been a very different style of podcast than, some of our most recent ones, certainly. The conversation that we've had, I feel like it's gonna be very illuminating for a lot of people. So I'll remind anybody listening that Lennart did do a call out for any students who are interested in emailing him for potential collaborations.
So where would those students go if they want to reach out to you?
They would go to hcigames.com, and there's a whole opportunities page, opportunities to work with us, that they can click on, and that'll bring them to message me. They can email me directly at len@uwaterloo.ca. If they go to Kai, they can also attend my How to Write Kai Papers course, and they will get lots of more information there. And just reach out.
Yeah, we were going to talk about that. Lennart's also doing a How to Write Kai Papers course. He's recording a podcast next week. It's going to be amazing. We were going to talk about it way more on this podcast, but
oh, that's right. This is where the plug goes, where I say, check out my podcast, How to Write Kai Papers, on Apple and all of the other podcasting services. And everything I learned about podcasts, I learned from these two here. So
the cycle continues.
Although
You've doomed another one.
Now we are becoming the students as you're sending us some better platforms to host this. Yes. Well, if you're not already on the HCI Games Group website, if you're listening to this, you're watching this on YouTube, and you don't have a tab open to there, what are you doing? Open it up. Email Lennart. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will cross our fingers and toes that we can all be back hopefully this summer when there's some good weather. We just need to cross our fingers and toes and send some emails over to the University of Waterloo.
Well, thanks to both of you. I actually really, and I can say that in public, I really miss running into both of you in person, because that brightens my day. It is such a nice thing to, see that. And also, your podcasting office is right next to my office, so that was always nice to see you get people in there. So hopefully we'll be able to do that at some point.